The partners, of course, are doing whatever it takes to make the most money for the firm. The associates are doing whatever it takes to satisfy the hour requirements and make their partners happy. And the result is a whole collection of what I very much think are lost souls working a lot, harder than anyone should be working, frankly. And
Mm-hmm.
for money that, do we really need all of this? And I say this because we lose folks to self-harm and big law every single year. And it just really speaks to the misprioritization of where people are spending their energy and time.
Mm-hmm.
Welcome to Breaking Stereotypes with Todd and Tootsie. Today we're joined by Julian Sarafian, a former attorney and current TikToker. Julian's TikTok videos have garnered over 3.5 million likes and focus on mental health advocacy within the legal profession. Before we get started with Julian, I'd just like to remind our viewers to hit the like button on this video and subscribe to our new channel for more in-depth interviews that break stereotypes. All right, welcome,
Yes.
Julian.
Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you both for having me.
So you've had a very interesting journey to get where you are today. I know you were a high school valedictorian. You went to UC Berkeley, graduated from Harvard Law, and were a California licensed attorney making $250,000 a year.
At 24 years of age as well. So,
Right.
which typically most attorneys are 25, correct? Because you're talking about 4 years of undergraduate plus 3 years of law school.
Yeah,
So
right.
you must have cruised through your undergraduate in 3 years, correct?
Yeah. I did graduate 1 year early from undergrad, yeah. And I went
Okay.
straight through.
Okay.
So what made you walk away from all of that? What happened?
Yeah, so I think you laid out the positive side of my story for sure, right? Which is the academic successes and getting the job in the legal profession that I wanted at a big law firm in Silicon Valley doing top-notch legal work. But the other side is there were a lot of costs to all of that success along the way. Back in high school, I had stomach aches from the stress of SAT prep and AP courses, and I didn't sleep as much as I think I probably should have. In college, I was very, very anxious around others, and I really didn't socialize as much as I think I should have, again, because I didn't really know that anxiety was a thing, unfortunately for me. But I was certainly very anxious at the time looking back. And
Julian,
then
real
things,
quickly, sorry to interrupt, but what was your college experience like as far as like housing? Did you live in the dorms? Did you have your own apartment? Those type of things where if you were lived in the dorms, for example, or were in a fraternity, you would have much more social contact, and that was something maybe that just wasn't in your life, or was it, something just kind of where you kind of locked yourself in your room because of all the symptoms you're experiencing?
right. I think it's mostly the latter. I mean, because I was in a dorm, the standard sort of college experience, and after my first year, I lived with a roommate off campus, which is what most folks did at Berkeley,
Hmm.
and so that was all fine. And I had plenty of acquaintances, right? The too many to count, and I was on several dance teams where I made a ton of friends, and so all of that was great. But the bigger issue was my own sort of irrational fear of, I don't know, saying something that wasn't perfect to somebody, or like, what if somebody doesn't like me? And a lot of these thoughts that uh, truthfully, they aren't irrational on their own, but my inability to regulate them certainly was. And over time, I let them sort of control my behavior and isolate me because I would have rather been alone, studying and focused in a controlled environment that I felt in control of and powerful of, than
Hmm.
putting myself into some situation where I maybe didn't feel as comfortable, simply because I didn't really have the wherewithal or knowledge on how to manage those feelings. And they were all in my head, and I felt like everyone else had the same sort of thoughts, but of course now I know that that is not the case, and
Hmm.
this is, I think, part of the problem that we have in our world with mental health is that these things aren't taught to us, and everyone is just kind of left to their own devices.
Hmm.
Right. And
Absolutely.
did you seek any help at the time? Like, were you aware that there was even anything going on? Because you're kind of saying, like, you didn't even know this was a thing. You thought
Right.
everyone felt this way.
Right. No, I really didn't. And I mean, it didn't impact my lifestyle in the worst ways. I mean, I still had a close group of friends. I still got very good grades. The society kept telling me, yes, good job, keep going, right? Of course, like the things that really matter, quote unquote, all of the grades and successes, like those were all lined up. And I had enough of a social network, albeit small, that I felt personally okay, just kind of cruising through. That's not to say that I couldn't have had a much better time, right? And enjoyed myself so much more
Sure.
had I adequately managed it. But of course, I didn't really know what was going on or that I was really being afflicted by it.
And so, what were how did it affect you as far as, kind of going up that ladder? So first you're at, a very competitive, well-renowned school like Berkeley, and you graduate in 3 years, so you must have pushed yourself to get to that point. And then you had, you went to NYU for a year, I believe, correct? And then you transferred to Harvard.
Yeah. Right.
And so and then after graduating from Harvard, you got this job in big law. So each step seems like it was incrementally more challenging and difficult, I would assume.
So law school was certainly had the most pressure because in law school, most of your ability to get a job is garnered off of your first year grades. And so your first year of law school, in many ways, at least the top schools, that's it. I mean, this is $300,000 in 3 years of your life that are riding on your ability to execute on 1 year. So I can say the pressure was certainly there, and much, the stakes were higher, of course. Undergrad, it was let's get into law school. Law school now it's okay, let's get like a job, and the pressure remained, through the remainder of my law school career. I would say in big law, the stressors sort of changed because the hours are tough, the lack of boundaries sucks. The work is intense, like that. All of that aside, right? That is true. We can leave that there. But I think the deeper issue was the sort of existential, like wondering of, you're on this track your whole life. Do this to get the next thing. Do this to get the next thing. Do this to get the next thing. And now you're here in big law, and I can say this at least for big law. The track, if you don't like it, you really don't like it, and there's no real clear sign of where to go from there. There's no more path. There's no more next step.
Well, except
then
for
you're left
to make partner or something, right?
Sure. Well, sure. Right. Yes, of course. Theoretically, yes, you can stay in the career and stay on the career track, or you can go in-house. Like there are some options, but now it's on you to think about, like, where do you want to spend your energy? Where do you want to spend your time? And this is what big law is going to offer you. It's going to offer you a high pressure career. It's going to offer you a lot of money. It's going to offer you high quality of work. It's not going to offer you boundaries. It's not really going to offer you a ton of time for yourself or for your family. And so the pressure just sort of changed into a more existential question, which was, what do I really want to be doing with my time? Because prior to that, I knew what I wanted to do with my time. I wanted to do the thing to get the next thing. I want to get the JD to get the opportunities to the next thing. But now it's different because I'm getting what I'm signing up for, which is the money. And that's fair. But is that really what I want to do forever?
Mm-hmm.
Did you enjoy any aspect of the work itself?
I would say like 25% of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I do think this is my personal opinion, which, I mean, who else?
That's a small percentage of it, though, for to go through what you went through.
Well,
right?
and it's complicated because, like, I don't think any job is perfect, right? So, like,
Sure.
I'm maybe being a little bit too idealistic, but there were some parts of the job that I felt could have been automated personally. Like, there were parts of it that I just thought were not efficient and, like, costed me personally as the attorney a lot more than it should have. When, at 12 o'clock, I get a phone call that I need to set up a meeting for the next 10 minutes, within 10 minutes, and I have to check 5 people's calendar. And I'm sitting here, I'm like, I went to Harvard Law School, so I could schedule a meeting, like, off the bat, super high pressure. Like, what are we doing here? Right? Like, this is just stupid. Like, I'm sorry, this is just dumb. Right? And so there were a lot of those things that I didn't really appreciate. But the client contact was super fun, advising these startup and entrepreneurial folks on where to incorporate their company and, like, governance issues and employee matters. Super interesting stuff. And being on the cutting edge of, in my case, corporate legal work in Silicon Valley, you're working with some of the coolest and newest companies that are leading the world in industry. So that was always fun.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened? Was it the lack of boundaries and the, high pace and just, the pressure of getting things done under these deadlines? I mean, was that kind of the
work hours?
Yeah. What was the tipping point for you?
Yeah, it's kind of all of the above, right? I think, like, of course, mental health for me is a separate track than big law, and I like to tell folks that because I think people hear my story and they think, oh, big law made it worse, or big law is the thing that really messed you up, quote unquote, or whatever. And it's like, that's not true. I've had mental health issues in the past. I just was never managing them until I was in big law and the pandemic hit, and suddenly I'm isolated from the world, and all we're doing is working 24/7, and clients are demanding even more of us because it's even busier for corporate attorneys. And you combine me wanting to focus on mental health with all of the various energy that that's going to take, with big law relentlessly demanding more and more and more and more and more time and energy, and like you said, no boundaries, no real freedom, no real end. There's no light at the end of the tunnel either. It just didn't make for a very fun future that I looked forward to.
Mm-hmm.
And at the time, this was last July, I looked around and I felt like my mental health was more important for me to spend my time and energy on, frankly. And I didn't really see an immediate future going into the other traditional paths out of big law and corporate law, which are going in-house or going to a smaller law firm. They just didn't really appeal to me because in many ways they spoke to more of the same type of energy, which is in many ways what being an attorney is, moving one thing to somewhere else, you know, and being process oriented and driven and that side of things, which is fine. But I'm just interested in other things right now.
And so you took a step back. You basically, I believe first you tried to just reduce your hours, right?
Yes, I did. So I went part-time for about the 5-month period before I quit. I was diagnosed in December of 2020. I went part-time basically in January until I just ended in July. Yeah.
And you found that wasn't working for you, just like
it wasn't enough.
Mm-hmm.
You're right. It wasn't enough. I mean, and I'm glad I tried because I was giving myself the best chance. I was like, let me see what honestly I could do. And even that was like a fairly big deal in the profession of, oh my God, you're going part-time. Like, is that gonna have impacts on partnership track? Like, you're gonna get paid less because part-time, you're, losing salary. Like, it's not a common thing. And I had to, petition for it and tell people why. And of course the firm was very supportive. There was no issue there. But even that step I think was already a little bit outlandish for folks in the legal profession. But no, it just wasn't enough space for me, given what I was getting from the job, frankly.
So would you say in big law that it's, pretty much impossible to have some kind of work-life balance?
I have not seen a single big law firm that is doing it well. I'll put it that way. I think there are probably maybe out there some partners in some small groups that have figured it out. Maybe. But honestly, I think the whole industry, it's kind of like a race to the bottom right now, because the way they differentiate from each other is who can respond faster. Like not better, not like higher quality work, like just faster. And like I'm not, I won't opine on whether or not that's a wise business strategy, but that's the system that we're in. And unfortunately, the partners, of course, are doing whatever it takes to make the most money for the firm. The associates are doing whatever it takes to satisfy the hour requirements and make their partners happy. And the result is a whole collection of what I very much think are lost souls working a lot, harder than anyone should be working, frankly. And for money that, do we really need all of this? And I say this because we lose folks to self-harm in big law every single year. And it just really speaks to the misprioritization of where people are spending their energy and time.
So when you took the step to actually walk away and focus on your mental health, what exactly did that look like?
Yeah, what did that feel like? Because, that's something that your entire 20s you had dedicated towards pursuing this goal, and all of a sudden, now, like, who am I, right?
Right. I would argue since I was 14 and a freshman year of high school too, we're really counted. No, it took me a long time to even accept that I had to leave big law, right? Or that I would be willing to leave big law. I mean, my plan for so long, and I've spoken to other folks from my law school class about this too, who have also left well earlier than we all expected. We went in thinking, oh yeah, we'll be there 4 or 5 years at least, then we'll do something else. But the thing that kept ringing in my head was unprecedented times call for unprecedented measures here. And the pandemic has shaken the entire world up. It's shaken humankind up. It's shaken every single industry up. It's shaken people's mental health up. And when I quit, I didn't, I had no idea what was going to come next other than focusing on my mental health, which I felt was very, very confidently, I felt was the right move. Frankly, what came next has been a lot of fun, and I've been advocating for the importance of mental health because I think more people need to be talking about it, and there's a lot of people suffering out there. But it's been a continual process of work in working on my mental health, which is what I expected, and that's why I quit my job because it's it's a full-time job if you haven't managed it like I have for so long, and you have to rewire so much that you didn't really know was going awry. And so the process remained slow and steady, and there were hiccups. There still are hiccups, but that's just the nature of the path and the journey. But it's been positive overall.
That's great.
Yeah, it is great. Can you talk a little bit about how you got to the point where you were experiencing suicidal ideation?
Yeah, I wish there were a formula to unpack why these things happen. It's ironic for me in my story because I began mental health treatment right after I got my diagnosis in December 2020, and suicidal ideation for me, it was fleeting. First time it happened was in February after things were already getting better. And that was the thing that jarred me the most, I should say, because if everything's getting better, if I was in the worst of it in December, what is going on? How is this coming up now? And I think there's a lot of aspects to it. One of them is, this is why the mental health world is incredibly complex, because there really isn't an explanation for these things, and you kind of just have to accept it, and there's no reason for it, and that's just the way it goes. But to your question of how it developed, I really do think mental health is to some extent a formula on, what are you doing? What are your inputs in your lifestyle and your habits, and where you're putting your energy, where you're putting your time and attention, and then what kind of thoughts and what kind of feelings are going to arise from it. And being in the midst of the pandemic and completely isolated from folks for whatever, 9-ish months. My fiance and I actually contracted COVID, and this was pre-vaccine, so it was like not a great experience. She worked in the hospital as a med student. She brought it home, and getting that was not fun. We were very ill for 2 months. Combine that with working relentlessly, and also I have 2 puppies, which are wonderful and I love them, but at the time we were also raising them, and that was a lot of work, raising 2 of them at the same time. So there was just a lot of work, and not a healthy level of socialization, not a healthy level of physical exercise or mindfulness or all of these other sorts of fundamentals of mental health that I think most folks out there probably know. And I think eventually, if you do that to somebody, and if you isolate them, it's probably going to arise. And if it doesn't, I would question their psychological state to begin with, because I think it's only really a matter of time.
Sure. Well, it's always an interplay between, kind of what the person's genetics are, right, and then their environmental stressors. And so when I say genetics, meaning the fact that, some people have a predisposition to anxiety or depression or whatever, and then all of a sudden you put yourself in, this really stressful environment, and then add on the pandemic and, the isolation that comes with that. It's just the perfect storm, right?
Yeah. Precisely. I mean, I think just the isolation aspect from the pandemic, and take away the fact that you had geopolitical turmoil and the scourge of a virus spreading mortality everywhere, and there's just layers of trauma that I think the pandemic has caused that folks, thankfully now I think we have some space to heal from, but certainly in 2020 we did not. So yes, to answer, just add on, I echo what you said.
Okay.
Well, I commend you for putting your mental health first and getting out of a situation that was, at best not a good fit, and at worst pretty toxic sounding. And so, but I guess my question for you is, what would you say to people who can't walk away for various reasons, financial, mouths to feed, student loans,
of course.
And not just legal, right? It's just like any sort of profession where there's no work-life balance and the demands and the pressures are high. Do you hear from people who are saying, I know exactly what you went through, I'm in the same exact scenario, but I can't quit. What do I do?
Right. Yes. No, it's a great question. And I'm very, very privileged to be in the position that I have been financially to quit outright. And it's still a risk, but certainly, of course, there's millions, probably billions of people out there who don't have the same privilege and yet who are still suffering. Like you said, including folks in our community who say that exact thing. Like, I'm where you were, but I can't quit. I have a mortgage, I have kids, I have all these things. What do I do? And it's tough because there's no silver bullet here. The best that I can say is there are still a lot of ways that you can educate yourself about mental health and learn about the space, learn about what the signs of anxiety and depression are. Try, even if it's just 5 minutes a day of doing sitting meditations or mindfulness training, try to exercise a little bit longer. Like it's not going to be perfect. And certainly being able to quit and having more time and energy to focus on it, like that's the best case scenario. But the principle will always remain the same, which is that it takes energy and time and focus and discipline to manage and work on mental health. And looking at it from that lens, maybe it takes them a little bit longer, maybe it takes them a lot longer, but what's important is starting that process and then being creative in how they fit it into their own lifestyle, be it through education, coaching, or other means.
Well, I think that, you know, the important thing would in those situations would be, of course, to engage in some kind of treatment, right? You know, some therapy and, you know, potentially taking medications and all the stuff that you did, you know, as far as self-care and things of that nature. But it's one of those things where we're still at this point in history where a lot of that is stigmatized. And so people are hesitant to reach out to a therapist and contact them and so on and so forth. But, you know, I worked in the field for a long time, and one of the things that I ran up against a lot of times is that people would come into my office and they would have these, you know, horror stories kind of like you described. And it was something that, you know, my number one recommendation is always preventative, right? You know, where the medical model most of the time ends up being something that isn't preventative in nature. It's really about, okay, so reactive, you know, how can we, what can we what medication can we put this person on? And, you know, can you come talk to me once a week for an hour? But it's much more than that, like as you've demonstrated.
Right.
So, so like
no,
systemically.
it's a wonderful, yes. No, it's a wonderful point. And I think I wish we were at the point where like that could be what we were working on, is like the proactive side of preventing issues instead of the triage, which is the current state of affairs, right? Not just because of the stigma that you're talking about, Todd, but the lack of resources. I mean, getting a therapist even. I was a privileged, rich corporate attorney in Palo Alto, and maybe this is ironic, or maybe it is not, but here's the reality. I tried to get a therapist in Palo Alto. It is like, you can't. You like, I have health insurance. I have like the nice whatever, you know, money and everything. It was still very, very hard, maybe because everyone in the Bay Area is really stressed and we know we all need it, right? But that, to put that aside, like the fact that it was still that hard for someone of my privilege and caliber, that's a huge problem.
Yes.
And of course, it remains a huge problem for folks who don't have the privileges. So, I
well,
agree with you.
especially during the pandemic, I mean, from my perspective, like the field was completely saturated because of the fact that so many people were experiencing it. Because again, you know, you take a lot of people who may have that predisposition and then, you know, put them inside their house for a year. And, you know, they can go to the grocery store maybe and the gas station. But other than that, it's one of those things where, so a lot of people needed help. And then it was one of those things where they were like, screw it, like stigma, I don't care, I'm reaching out. But in mass, when people do that, there's just not enough providers out there.
No, there aren't.
So it's a difficult problem for sure.
Do you have thoughts or suggestions on how people in the legal profession can advocate within their own companies? Because I'm imagining that if you're, you know, like yourself in that situation, and then you go to your boss and you're like, look, I just don't have work-life balance. I need some help, or, you know, would you get laughed out of the office? Would they be like, you're, you know, that's what you signed up for? Like, what is the support level like?
Yeah, so it's tricky because in the legal profession, especially in big law, you're kind of trained by a very small select group of attorneys. So first of all, it's going to depend, like a classic lawyer answer, right? It depends on if your bosses are more reasonable or not. And I think New York-based law firms, for the most part, tend to be more unreasonable. They tend to be more like, nope, you signed up for this, like that's the way it goes. West Coast folks tend to be a little more human in nature, apologizing if you have to do something on the weekend, et cetera, et cetera. Now, that's not to say that as an associate, you're powerless. I mean, there are a lot of things that you can do. They're not perfect and they're not going to solve the macro level issues here, but setting boundaries is very important. Not responding if it's past a certain time of day, if something is not urgent or necessary, right? Taking time to go to the gym and like actually doing it and putting the phone off. Those things are important. Taking vacation and not working on vacation, which shouldn't be a thing that I should have to say, and yet here we are. And on the other side, there's you know, you mentioned advocacy. When I was at my old firm, I pushed internally to get us on Ginger, this emotional coaching and wellness app during the pandemic, because I saw the pain that was being wrought on everybody. And thankfully, my firm was very open to it and eventually got us on that app. So I think leadership is open and willing to accept and make some of these changes, but it's gonna take work on the behalf of the associate or staff or partner who's pushing for it, to frankly push leadership along and make it happen.
Right.
Because I think everyone in big law is so busy. It's not necessarily a fault of their own, but they're so busy that things like this just aren't the number one priority, even though they probably should be.
Sure.
And it probably gets back to the stigma where you have to have the courage to speak up within your employment situation and be willing to say, hey, this is what I need. And that's pretty scary, I think, for a lot of people to do.
Right. I mean, there's that. Then there's the fact that like you're already busy and like you're not paid for this. It's like I'm already exhausted. I'm like, you're asking me now, like out of the goodness of my heart, right, to go and like advocate for this and like push for it. I'm not in a world where everything is measured based on the billable hour and my whole worth is literally a number in a calendar. Like this doesn't count. This is imaginary poof time and energy away, and so that doesn't help either, right?
So as you know, the name of our show is Breaking Stereotypes, and one of the reasons that I wanted to get you on here was because you break stereotypes, but on a lot of kind of different levels as I see it. So Julian, what do you think is the stereotypical attorney? So for people who are not out there, I know that that could lead to a lot of bad jokes, but what do you think kind of the archetype is? And and I'm sure that you fit certain parts of that,
that's
right?
What I was gonna say.
Like clearly, like your intelligence, your drive, so on and so forth. But what's your perception of that?
Yeah, look, I don't know. Maybe I say this because I went through the process and I am a licensed lawyer, and I look around and I'm like, I just see people who are like happen to want to be lawyers, right? But the tropes go that lawyers are fairly type A. We're systematic and analytical thinkers. Detail oriented comes to mind. I will say personally for me, I'm not at all. I'm very, very bad at attention to detail, but that is something that gets thrown around too. Also, and probably most importantly, it's just the strength and advocacy. When push comes to shove, I think lawyers by training will advocate and will stand up for either themselves or the idea or the clients that they represent or believe in, because that's what law school kind of trains you to do. And I think if you went to law school, you probably know that advocacy is an essential piece of the puzzle in what being a lawyer is.
I have to ask you this. How many attorneys do you think went into the profession because of the status and money involved as well? And not like given a percentage, but
70%.
Okay.
80%.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, easily. Okay. I mean, I question often, I think about if big law paid $50K a year, how many people would stay?
Yeah. We actually talked about that off the air. We said, if you made $40,000 a year,
right,
who would sign up for that?
1% would stay.
Right.
That's like I was there. I saw people and what they did. I'm like, you guys don't actually like. Some really loved it, right? And that's the 1%. The people who love the actual work and like the technicalities of it, and like the lawyering, and that's awesome. But like, by and large, no, it is. And I get it. That's fair. There's nothing wrong with that. Be very clear, right? Incentives are incentives. I get it.
Well, that's part of the conundrum, right? Because you've got this, you have to be paid very well for, the education that you need to do it, and the amount of time and hours and all that. So, and then it's like, so how do you pull back on billable hours?
If your motivation is money.
Right. And so it's, how do you make that like a 40-hour a week job? And
right. I mean, this is the tricky part of where the legal industry is at right now, and I do think it's at a crossroads. And I do think it's going to shift in the next 10 to 20 years, where you're going to see firms that are essentially just adopting what already exists in a lot of the business world, which is a more fair and equitable and like properly efficient model of, we're going to charge XYZ for this service. We're going to hire more lawyers so that folks don't have to work 80 hours a week, because why hire one guy for 80 hours a week when you can hire two for 40 and pay them each half, when they're probably you're going to be able to find the talent, right? The issue is that right now you have almost an oligopoly of top legal talent and of top clients all being saturated in big law. And without these sort of smaller players, and there are smaller players growing very, very quickly because they're doing this exact thing that I'm talking about, which is being slimmer, being more efficient. Just because these firms are big doesn't mean they're efficient. Mm-hmm. And I saw in my old firm, which was one of the most, I should say, innovative and technologically savvy, so many things that I'm like, if you just changed these 5 things infrastructurally with the technology of the firm, you would increase the bottom line by probably 50%. And that's better for everybody. We're talking about money here, right? And making the partners more money. Well, guess what? That has nothing to do with time that you're billing. That has everything to do with being literally innovative and efficient and changing the system. But when these partners, my personal opinion, are making 7 figures a year already in the status quo, just do what we did last year. That's kind of the mantra for most of the legal profession, to be frank, not just big law. Mm-hmm. And that's just, that sort of ideology doesn't lead to productive results in the end.
Sure. And then the other thing, too, is that I would wonder throughout an attorney's career, if they were in big law, if they climbed up the corporate ladder, that, they continue to make more money. But I'm wondering what your experience is with talking with people as far as, kind of their lifestyle, kind of naturally adjusting to that. And then it's one of those things where you have a great house and maybe a boat or a vacation house, but because of how hard you're working, you're not even really able to utilize that, right? So so the things that you're maybe had that buying power to have, like that vacation house or that great vacation, you're not able to utilize. Or am I off base here?
Yeah, no. You're yeah. I was not even a partner with the layers of responsibility that partners have. They work more than associates. The joke is that you when you become partner, it's like winning a pie eating contest and the prize is more pies. One of my professors also said. Right? I think it's very apt because you have to not only do the work, you now have to manage associates, you have to be part of the leadership structure. I felt like I couldn't even handle, I don't have children. Like I had dogs, not even close, right? And yet I felt completely stretched and not fulfilled and not able to spend my time the ways that I wanted. And so, yes, it's absolutely a problem that folks are stretched beyond their limits and don't find time to do things like spending time with family and going out for a walk or getting 8 hours of sleep even, regularly. And it's unfortunate because ultimately we all lose as a result of this. I think their families lose. I think they lose as an individual. I think we as a collective lose because what are we really gaining from this? I mean, some money in the person's bank account. I'd rather have a more friendly neighbor. I'd rather have someone who's more present in the community instead of just being on their laptop all the time in the office.
Sure.
So it's not a great system. And to your point, yeah, it certainly exists, the sort of golden handcuffs.
And also, just can you talk a little bit about your experiences? It didn't sound like personally you got involved with this, but with relying on substances, for example, to get through the day, or divorce rates, or suicide completions, things like that, which you don't when you think of an attorney. Like I think I have a couple that work for me, for example. I see them just as very strong, intelligent people who get the job done. I don't see that part of them. But what you've said, on your TikToks is that this is very prevalent. All these things, to try to probably cope and get by, right?
Yeah. I mean, we are the leading profession by addiction. 30% of attorneys have signs of clinical depression. Nearly 43% of law students report having signs of anxiety. I would argue many of these figures are underestimates because, like anything in mental health, I think we can both agree, like we don't accurately and properly measure these things, right? So there's problems everywhere. And personally, with substance abuse, I mean, I did some marijuana during the pandemic to that was my vice to literally, like you said, just cope with the various stressors when I didn't have my anxiety under control. But I think the more prevalent one is probably alcoholism, frankly, right? I think, and that's, I've seen it in classmates of mine who are already, and we're 3 years out of law school, 4 years out of law school, who are already multiple times a week just downing alcohol because that's what it is. And they go with their bosses and they tell me stories about how their bosses, these partners, are just downing a fifth of whiskey casually on a Wednesday night. And I mean, you have happy hours at firms everywhere where that's the predominant way that they socialize and they get to know each other. It's not through a game night or, you know, something more quote unquote wholesome. But usually the way that they connect is let's just go downstairs and grab a beer. And which in and of itself is fine, right, to be clear. But I think because of all these problems we're talking about, like maybe we should just diversify just a little bit, guys. So yeah, it's certainly a real issue. And by the way, I like how you put it, where you discussed how your lawyers have to put on a certain face for you. And I think this is part of the real struggle of being an attorney, is you are looked to in our world as this sort of arbiter and strong foundation for your clients, right? And showing vulnerability, of course, in a system that already exists where you stigmatize vulnerability to some extent, that there's that problem. But on a professional level, I think when you're a lawyer, you're a service provider and you want to put your best foot forward. You want to show your clients, I got this, everything. And when you don't have the same sort of gratitude given to you as an attorney that, let's say, doctors get, which I understand why doctors are not charging $800 an hour to move around, you know, documents, right? Like, it's fair. But nonetheless, when you don't have the sort of natural gratitude coming from the folks that you do all this work for, and yet you still have to put on this side of strength and this front, it wears you down. And because it never ends and the work cascades and cascades and cascades, this is why I think a lot of attorneys really struggle and really suffer, because it's just not a really balanced or healthy way to live. And as attorneys themselves, they're not being given an adequate amount of, call it love, respect, I don't know what you want to call it, by the system, even though I understand why. And there's no faulting the clients for not giving it to them. It's just an unfortunate circumstance.
Sure. Well, I mean, it seems like that permeates, you know, all, you know, kind of regions of law. You know, I think about, you know, in my past when I did some work for our county here in the jail system, I would work with the public defenders. And, you know, they were not paid that much at all. They were typically right out of law school. Their caseloads were immense. A lot of times they wouldn't even be able to review a case until 5 minutes before they were being seen in front of a judge.
Right.
So, you know, so it was just this tremendous amount of pressure. And then you have people's lives at stake, you know, as far as, you know, so a lot of plea bargaining went on just because of the fact you had to get through the caseload, you know, for example, you know, and so think about pressure. It's something where, let's say somebody is, you know, you really want to fight for them, but at the same time, you just don't have the time. And I'm sure that equates to big law or corporate law, where it's, you know, this, you got to kind of get things done, but they've got to get done well, but you don't have the time to get things done the way you would like to, which again, you know, I would think creates a lot of pressure.
Yep. No, absolutely does. And on top of that, like you said, when you're doing work for folks that you really care about, or you are an attorney who's dealing with a vulnerable population, you have the emotional weight of responsibility on your shoulders too, which just is always going to make it hard, but is even harder when you're in the system.
And so, you know, one of the reasons that, or again, the main reason that you break the stereotype is that you said no thank you anymore, and I'm going to use my brain power and my knowledge of the system, and I'm going to advocate for other people, and I'm going to create a community. And you know, I just talked to you prior to us recording about you just did a TED Talk, and you know, you're starting to kind of go in different directions on social media and things of that nature. So, you know, you're somebody who lived it, and you're spreading that message, which, you know, every attorney I've ever met, like, they wouldn't do that. Do you know what I mean? And so what do you think makes you different, that, you know, you've kind of said, you know, kind of, you know, again, screw this. I'm gonna really, I experienced this, and I want to share my story, and I want to help other people in the process.
Yeah, no, it's very kind of you. I appreciate the praise, Todd. You know, look, I look at people who inspire me in history, and they're folks who have never let any sort of label or system define them. And they're folks who have stood up for what they've believed in, be it racial inequality or inspiring others in the political arena or taking action in your community, whatever it may be, the important thing for me was looking around and just realizing I wasn't having fun anymore. And I don't care if I'm a lawyer. I earned the right to call myself a lawyer, but I'm not just a lawyer. And I'll always be saying that because that's what life is. And I think it's kind of silly when people just become what the profession that they are working in calls them. And that's sort of, they adopt the personality of the monolith that is in front of them when, like, hello, you have a choice. You can walk away, you can do something else. And I should also add, it's fairly common for lawyers to step out of law. It's increasingly common, actually, in my opinion. And so I didn't think it's not the most radical thing. I mean, what I'm doing is certainly unique, but it's not at all out of the ordinary to just leave the legal profession and just do other things, be it book writing or the arts or journalism or even culinary arts and whatever. There's people do all sorts of stuff, especially from my alma mater, from HLS. People do all sorts of stuff. So.
So is the goal of your advocacy to change the system, or is it to simply bring awareness to what it is for people who may, to prevent people from getting in too deep that it may not be a good fit for? Does that make sense?
I think a blend of both right now. I think it's mainly the latter, simply because power is not that easy to garner, and institutions are not easy to change. And getting a lot of these policy proposals through either institutions or companies or the government, of course, who knows if that'll even ever happen, right? Me or someone else aside, any advocate aside. At the same time, I think awareness is always going to be important, because the less alone people know that they are out there, the better. And that goes triple for mental health when you're grappling against your own mind. I mean, there's nothing more isolating than being trapped with your own thoughts and feeling like this is my whole existence in reality. So I do think it's going to be a blend of both.
Okay. Yeah, it makes sense, because it feels like the system, to change the system, you basically have to change capitalism. Because it feels like there will always be someone out there that's willing to undercut. Let's say a bunch of firms do decide, we're cutting hours and, we're having more work-life balance. Like, won't someone else come in and just be like, nope, we're doing it the other way.
Right. No. I think you're precisely correct. I think that's where the cultural change has to come in, because, like, ultimately people will still have a choice, and, like, the people who want to have fun are cool, and the students that are going to be in the highest demand, like me 3-4 years ago, we're going to go to the places that we think are cool, that we like, that we resonate with. And there's always going to be, that's fine. Like, I let the sweatshops be the sweatshops, right? But if we can at least shame all of these other industries and all these other people that are not treating folks right and who aren't, like, prioritizing it, that's a good start. It's something.
It's like you're doing grassroots work, basically, through social media.
In some ways.
It's got to start somewhere, and it's something that it's capitalism, but at the same time, if you look at history, at some point, I don't remember exactly what it was, probably early 20s or 30s, they implemented, kind of the standard 40-hour work week, where before people were working 7 days or 6 days a week, they had Sundays off, type of deal. And so it got to the point of legislation where, like, employers had to provide certain things. Are we just at that next stage where we have to, go even further as far as, implementing something, again, that really kind of comes from law?
Yeah, it would help, right? I think part of it is certainly, of course, it would be helpful if we had a stronger regulatory regime that protects mental health, be it work hours or limiting, I don't know, the time of work per hourly, weekly or monthly work limits. Of course, these things would help. I frankly think it would naturally come about if we all focused on the ideas instead of the solutions. And the ideas here are taking care of your mental health and learning and managing it and accepting that it's a big part of fulfillment in life. Because once everybody can agree on that, which I think at the end of the day, everybody does agree. I just think there's so much momentum in the other direction that it takes somebody quitting their job and yelling on TikTok to even, like, start a tiny conversation, right? I mean, that's not that's not nothing. I think we would have that sort of change. And I think folks and companies would adapt. And I think you see it already in technology companies. I mean, the most profitable companies today and the largest companies today, Google grew by having folks dinner every night supplied, and beanbag chairs and game rooms and a gym, because they understood that a happier employee is a more productive employee, and a happier employee will stay longer at the company, which reduces attrition and makes the company more efficient and innovative and profitable in the long run. So like, it already exists in a lot of ways. I think we just need to get everybody else, especially the legal profession, caught up.
Yeah. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It's just hard to imagine having beanbags in a law firm. Do you know what I mean? With the Persian rugs.
Slide.
And
A boy can dream.
And the beautiful furniture, and all of a sudden,
Right.
you see that they'll probably put
Big
that in a
wheels
different
and-
room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But no, I think that's definitely a good way to start, for sure.
So let's talk about your TikToks, because, there was obviously, you walked away. There was probably a period of decompression. And then there was a point where you started speaking. Was it actually LinkedIn that was your first post?
Yeah. So ironically, I honestly don't really think I've given myself much time to decompress, which is the classic burnout, and it just shows how old habits die hard. I know you're shaking.
You're
your
going to
head.
have to
I know.
walk away from TikTok.
I know.
Or
No,
just
no,
post
I
one video a day. We had another
Yeah.
TikToker on it
Yeah.
who does 3.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
yeah, that could be pressure filled, and especially once you've gotten the following that you have, people expect, to hear from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is something that I need to personally work on myself, because frankly, I quit my job because I didn't care what anyone else thought. That was the whole point.
Right.
So like, I think this is
Yes.
definitely a me thing in terms of like, need to take time, and I'm working on it. But yes, to answer your question, Tootsie, had one post on LinkedIn 3 days after I quit my job that basically outlined my whole story, right? What we talked about, which is the goods and the bads. And there was a very strong response from the folks on, whatever, the ether of LinkedIn and the internet, which I found was very supportive and very kind, and also in some ways scary and shocking to me, because it showed me just how deep we are in this crisis.
Right. You didn't
and so
expect to have the reaction you did, right? Like the amount of responses.
No,
that-
I did. I mean, I didn't really know what I posted on LinkedIn one time before, and it was like 3 days. It was literally the day before, saying, "Hey, everyone, I left my law firm." Okay, so I didn't have an audience. I had no idea what to expect, but I wanted to put it out there for anyone who would benefit from it. And I've very much had the same mantra since then for any avenue that I can find. I began with writing articles on Medium, and I've written some for Bloomberg Law and American Lawyer as well. But I found that the organic reach was very limited. I'd spent a lot of time in an article. I put it out there to get 20 views, and that's not because it's bad. It's because it's how the internet works, which is how I found TikTok, because I first went on Instagram, found that, again, the organic reach wasn't very strong. And on TikTok, magically, here we go. This is where culture and currency and attention is living right now.
Yes.
And I haven't looked back.
That's great. And to me, that breaks stereotype too, because I wouldn't expect to go on TikTok to hear a lot of intricacies about the legal profession,
Yeah.
but you obviously do it in an entertaining and informative way.
Yeah, and you're able to
it's-
laugh at yourself,
yeah.
and you make it's not all content about, so it's something that I think what draws people in is your story, but then what keeps people in is just your personality. Again, I think you make a lot of interesting content.
That's very kind of
So-
you. I appreciate that. Needed to hear that today, so thank you.
Well, I mean, you got a following for a reason, right? And it's something that I think, honestly, you're kind of a natural at. Like, you're probably a better
Very sweet.
TikToker, maybe than a lawyer. I mean,
Probably.
do you know what I mean? So,
That's very sweet of you. I would just add, I do think TikTok is changing. I mean, TikTok is very new, right? Like with the pandemic, I think we had a lot of stigma because it first started as a lot of dancing, a lot of like Gen Zers are on it, and it still very much is a dominated app by the youth. But it's very quickly changing, and there are a lot of educators on the app. There's a lot of folks that are trying to inspire folks and just share information. I mean, a lot of the war in Ukraine footage is on the app left and right too. So I do think it is going to change. But I don't disagree that there is some debauchery and chaos there too, because it is TikTok.
Yeah.
yeah, but at the same time, like you said, and I absolutely agree that an older audience is starting to permeate it, and creators, and so it's one of those things where just like Facebook,
Yep.
and Instagram even, it's one of those things where originally it was kind of more for Gen Zers, but now I think it's only I think 3 years old in the U.S.
Very young. Yeah,
You know, it's something that is going to be ever expanding, and you know, there's a lot of great content creators out there, and it's something that I think, you know, your reach is going to even be more and more, you know, as more, you know, kind of adults, you know, who are also you know, probably struggling with similar issues come into contact with you, and then that ends up being something where they can say, wow, if this guy did it, like, you know, I can get treatment. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. No, precisely. I mean, if you really think about it, all of these things are just forms of people to communicate with other people. It's really just a tool, it's a platform, right? Like, we think of them as their own like cultures and monoliths and companies and all that, and that's fine. But I can tell you from my perspective, because I'm only on it for this purpose, it's that it's a tool to send a message. In the same way Instagram is, in the same way Medium is, in the same way a letter is, in the same way speaking on this podcast is. But right now, that's where a lot of the action is, and they have, you know, the company has done a lot of smart things to cater to that. So,
and it's probably helpful for lawyers that don't have a lot of time. And this is such a big, heavy topic, right? To just have it distilled into these nice bite-sized little
10 seconds.
Yeah, and it's probably just a big stress relief for them to just say, "Oh yeah, totally, yes,
True.
You know,
yeah, cathartic, right? No, it's very true. Yeah.
Well, and validating, you know, that okay, this is something that I'm experiencing. So, you know, what do I do about it? And you know, again, maybe the first step is just talking about it with a friend or a family member, or trying to reach out to a therapist. You know, I mean, I think that one of the positive directions we're going into, which is not ideal, but it's better than nothing, is, you know, you're starting to see teletherapy more, you know, so Zoom meetings and things of this nature. And so have you ever thought about kind of going into the field yourself at some point?
Therapy itself, probably. Frankly, I'm done with school. Like, I've done enough school for like 3 lifetimes at this point, at least for me. So I think being a therapist would be awesome, but I'm just not willing to commit to the necessary background for it. But I certainly love coaching, you know, and I think like we have a Discord community that is built around this sort of idea of just like we're not perfect, but if we can support somebody else in any way, we're gonna try. And so I certainly love that aspect of therapy, which I do very much think is coaching based and helping somebody think about things differently and being a thought partner in their struggle, whatever it is.
Sure.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of your videos where you're responding to questions from viewers and people are asking you advice. So, you know, in a way that's already happening for you. And I'm kind of curious, like, how that feels to be this, you know, on the forefront where you're now giving the advice to everyone that maybe you could have used a few years ago.
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, I have been lucky to have had folks in my life who have given me that advice in varying ways over the years, right? And so for me, I really just want to pay it forward. It costs me nothing. I think it helps everybody in the whole system of just exist. You know, if we have more transparency in law school admissions and undergrad admissions, for whatever it is, better for them. And for folks in our community too, there's a lot of folks out there who don't have the privilege that I have had in terms of knowing lawyers and being able to interview them and talk to them. And so seeing things from my perspective, I think helps them just get an insight into like, what is it like to be a lawyer, which certainly is helpful. You know, I think for folks who are maybe on the cusp of not knowing whether they want to pursue it, because it's a big commitment.
Sure. Well, one of the other things that really struck me about, you know, some of your content, you know, for example, you say that, you know, I've kind of reached the pinnacle, and, you know, I still felt like hell, and that there was, you know, that mental health kind of trumped everything. And, you know, that kind of reminded me of, you know, I know you're probably young, you probably weren't even born around this time, but of Kurt Cobain, because he was kind of, you know, our generation, Tootsie's and I's, you know, at the time that he took his life, he was on top of the world. And, you know, it really didn't make sense to anybody, because it's something like this guy has #1 album, you know, he's married, he has a young daughter, and it's one of those things where if anyone has something to live for, it's Kurt Cobain, and then he ends up, you know, taking his life in a really harsh manner. And so, but I think that that's something that people have this kind of expectation, maybe that's not the correct word, but that if you get to this certain level, then all your problems are going to go away.
Right.
When the reality is that, you know, they're completely separate entities. right?
Exactly.
And you've experienced that.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, and wanting is always more fun than having, right? I think in general, maybe it's human psychology, call it whatever you want. And I think that's the idea, is that folks look at a conception of something they want or someone that they wish they could be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, because they only look at the good side. And that's honestly the problem here, frankly, right? Is I think Kurt, you saw all of the successes, you see that side of him. You don't see what's in his head. You don't see what's like the thoughts that he's having on a day. Like, clearly, no one did, right? From my understanding. And I think if we had more of that transparency, we wouldn't romanticize these things as much, because I think we would be like, holy crap, all these people who are lawyers or who are Harvard Med School graduates or et cetera, the highest degrees, like it's stressful. There's a lot going on all the time, because that's what it takes to get to that level and to perform at that level and to continue at that level. So it's a common narrative of folks not, thinking they have it all, and then we were surprised by the result. But.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing with Kurt too is that, and I don't know if, because I've read a couple of books on him, is that he had a lot of similar issues to you as far as physiological issues, like with his stomach and, so on and so forth, which then led to heroin addiction, which he used to treat his stomach issues, which in a lot of cases, it could have been physiological, but it also could have been just anxiety and stress and so on and so forth. And then it's one of those things where once you have, all of these, you have all these expectations placed upon you, but you still have the problems. It almost kind of probably felt unsurmountable.
Yeah, and look, the stigma doesn't help, of course, right? But I think the uncertainty on top of that, especially for, now, I would say it's a better time to accept being an anxious person now than it ever has been. I mean, you can go on Instagram and find like hundreds of pieces of content about like flowery pictures of here's what anxiety is, not the worst thing in the world. But in general, I think this is what I grappled with, I think, a lot when I had my gagging issues in my early 20s. It's like this gray cloud of uncertainty of like, what is this thing? Like I have no idea or conception of even like what even is anxiety? Like, is it a feeling? Is it a set of thoughts? Is it a pattern? Is it like a disorder? Is it a condition? Is this genetic? Like, I have no idea, because we never talk about it. Like, it's not like a bad thing. It's not a good thing. It's a nothing. And that's arguably worse, because when you combine nothing with a stigma, you have avoidance. And the avoidance takes the form of drug use or of coping or of, more mental health issues. And in the end, it's never going to be constructive, frankly, because you're avoiding, grappling with something that you need to take care of.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So what is next for you, Julian?
That's a good question. I'm doing a lot of different things right now. It's a mouthful. I am a writer, content creator, entrepreneur, Twitch streamer, and mental health advocate, of course. And so I'm doing a lot of different projects. One of them is I'm working with a couple of close friends. We're co-founders of a company called Nest Mode, and we want to reinvent shower storage. Yes, you heard that correctly, shower storage.
Okay.
And so we've basically designed a magnetic-based shower accessory holster where bottles slap on and off this wall, and we have these holsters that have all these, basically can hold all of
Oh my God, I want that. That sounds great.
I'll drop.
That's interesting. That's not what I expected you to say at all.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I'm working on, I'm writing a book, hoping to get that published later this year about just kind of my own mental health journey, and I overlay with a broader narrative of where we are mental health wise in the world. And beyond that, I'm gonna stay true to my advocacy work and just keep yelling at wherever I can, however I can, anywhere I can, to get this message out to people. Because look, our community has grown from nothing in 6 months to what it is now, and that's amazing. But I still know, and I feel out there that there's so many people that haven't heard it, frankly. Why? Because the TikTok algorithm hasn't shown it to them. So, if only it were up to me, right, guys? But staying true to the advocacy work and keep the community growing to support as many folks as we can, for as long as we can.
Yeah, and I'm wondering, how you're doing now, as far as kind of making that decision, and just how you're feeling day to day comparatively to 2020.
Yeah, so certainly a lot happier. Mental health wise, certainly better and better than I've ever felt in my life, because I am finally grappling and learning to manage the anxiety. which only makes life better. Of course, it's not perfect, and I'm still, I'm not at 100% still. It's going to take more time.
Sure.
And there are bad habits that I have fallen back into. And just recently, I took a break from social media for a little bit because I felt like I had fallen too close to it and I wasn't focused on a big picture level with my time. But on the whole, I haven't really looked back, and I don't really see myself going back for a variety of reasons. But this is the same thing that led me to quit my job, which was I want to go out there and have some fun and do something different. Still drives me today, and I think we'll hopefully keep it up in the future.
Great. Well, for our viewers too, this is our second time taping, and I really want, or recording, I should say, and I really want to thank you, Julian, for helping us out here, and hopefully we can give you another platform to tell your story, and again, just being so flexible as far as trying to make the time for us, and doing a second take because of we had some technical issues, but this seemed like it
I know how it
went
goes.
really well. And so again, I just really want to express my appreciation for that because it's a big deal.
Of course. No, my pleasure. Thank you guys for having me on. It was
Yeah,
awesome.
and congratulations on all the work you're doing. I think you really are genuinely helping people, and that's just an awesome thing. That's very commendable,
Thanks.
and that's why I wish you all the best in the future. So, just want to ask our viewers to comment on if Julian broke the stereotype of an attorney in
For big law,
Yeah,
yeah.
and put a comment below. Tell us what you thought. Be sure to hit like and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more in-depth interviews that break stereotypes.
Yeah, and Julian, what can you tell our viewers where to find you?
Yes. So I can give you guys my Beacons link, but it's Beacons, BEACONS.AI/Julian Serafian. And that has all of my various socials. I'm most active on TikTok and Instagram, but also hop into our Discord sometime. It's open to the public. And if you want to talk mental health or get some career advice, there's a Q&A for me, and I answer every single question. We'd love to see any of you folks around.
That's great. And we can put
Awesome.
that in our description box
Cool.
to link that
Awesome.
for you as well. Okay.
Awesome.
All right. Thanks, Julian.
Thanks, Julian.
Take care.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you,
Okay.
both.
Bye.